again.
Oh, hey, are we live?
We're live.
We're live. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so, yeah, we're here. Hi.
Chris is feeling a little behind schedule.
Yeah, I'm just a touch frazzled. yes, I'm here, and my drink for this evening decided to...
Assassin.
Yeah.
It foamed.
Big time. Pop the top and foam everywhere.
Hi, Patrick. Yes, it is Werewolf night. This was a fun one. Thank you.
Yes. So, we're here. Yuna's here.
Lulu's chasing empty boxes over there.
I got my beer, so
I got my medicinal tea.
Yes. Beth is boring tonight.
I am. We've had too many spicy things, and my stomach is being very vocal about that. But yay.
Yeah, I got some fine stuff from our friends down at Rich Brow Brewing, so I'll be partaking in that once the
foam goes
the
down.
foam goes down just a little bit.
All right, so let's dive into werewolves. Do you want to start off, or do you want me to?
Go ahead, because we have a problem person in the feed.
Oh, lovely. One of those.
This guy here, don't anybody click on his link.
Yeah, that is spam. Do not click on it whatsoever. Give us a minute to get rid of him.
Well, no, you can go ahead.
Okay.
You can go ahead.
All right, so werewolves, we're looking at the lore, the legends, and the lycanthropy.
Lycanthropy.
Yes.
Lycanthropy.
My brain and tongue are not working tonight, just to give you all a warning. So pronunciation's not going to be my forte tonight. Alright, so werewolves. Literally, this is Old English for man-wolves. They are shape-shifting creatures with unusual speed, strength, reflexes, and senses. And if anybody who has ever seen Season 2 of Buffy and Poor Oz's introduction into the world of werewolf, you know what we're talking about. Also, of course, if you've seen any of the iconic films. They can be found in countless books, films, television shows, and the horror classics, of course. The Wolfman, modern-day adaptations, which include Twilight and Underworld series, and the werewolf, though it's often played second fiddle to vampires and zombies in the terms of our pop culture, man-monsters, they have a long, rich history that stretches back millennia. So it's been a lot of fun. Again? Okay. So the early legends, it's unclear exactly when and where the werewolf legend actually originated. Some scholars believe that the werewolf made its debut over 4,000 years ago in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And this is the earliest surviving great work of literature where a werewolf is actually mentioned. Part of the story tells how Gilgamesh rejects the advances of Ishtar, the goddess of fertility, love, war, and sex. Now, why would Gilgamesh spurn this undeniably exciting immortal? Well, Ishtar has a history of past suitors, and there was one young shepherd who was head over heels in love with the goddess, and for some time she flirted with the young man, encouraging him to leave her bountiful offerings, but the goddess, as goddesses and gods do, became bored with her little human plaything, and instead of just sending him away, she turned him into a wolf. That wolf subsequently was torn to shreds by the shepherd's own hounds. So, in our humble opinion, Gilgamesh probably made a wise decision. While our modern image of this fierce werewolf may not be the creature that could easily be taken down by a pack of mere dogs, this man-wolf transformation is arguably the earliest depiction of lycanthropy. Now, werewolves, on other appearances, happened in all different types of cultures. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm not going to get hit with a burning log. One example is from Greek mythology with the legend of Lycan. According to the legend, Lycan was the son of Pelagus, and he angered the god Zeus when he served him a meal made from the remains of a sacrificed boy. As punishment, Zeus turned Lycan and his sons into wolves. This gives us the origin of the word lycanthrope, which translates to wolf person in Greek. Do you have a question?
Nope, we're good.
Okay, just making sure. Another early example comes from Nordic folklore. In this early part of the saga of the Volsungs, there's a story of Sigmund and his son Sinjolti. Did I pronounce that right? You've been playing with
Sinfjolti.
Sinfjolti, excuse me. I have not been watching Vikings, so I do not know how to pronounce these. Anyway, they discovered wolf pelts that had the power to turn them into wolves, and of course the father and son don the pelts, they transform into wolves, and they go on a killing rampage in the forest. Their rampage only ends when Sigmund attacks Sinfjolti in a jealous rage after Sinfjolti kills 11 men on his own without his father's help. The wound inflicted by Sigmund would have been lethal, except for that a raven comes by to provide Sigmund with a miraculous herb to heal his vicious bite. The fearful lack of control that they experienced while they were wearing these pelts actually led them to burn them so they would never be misused again. Fun times.
Yes.
So beware the pelt. And that's actually very similar in many different tales of having some type of animal pelt that will turn you into another animal. The silky, for example in the Irish mythology. So, ready?
Yes.
Since you've been dealing with everything else.
Yes. Let's see. So, yeah. Werewolves. That's already mentioned, briefly touched on how werewolves come to be as far as...
some of the literature has shown us.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different theories about it. But so as time goes on, the theories behind the creation of werewolves goes beyond gods and magic-infused objects. One method from ancient Greece said that a person could be transformed into a werewolf by eating the meat of a wolf that had been mixed with that of a human. The resulting condition was irreversible, but I am a bit curious about who wrote the recipe that calls for 1/2 wolf and 1/2 human flesh.
No, thank you.
Moving on. So next we have actually being conceived under a new moon. So, for those couples, for those couples where seeing each other by moonlight is still even just a little bit too much, your parents may be physically repulsed by the sight of one another, you might be a werewolf.
That was just something really interesting that came up.
So getting conceived under the new moon, not even any moonlight. Now we have some herbs. Now these herbs, this kind of goes, it's a little fuzzy on this because this actually has a little bit of merit to it. You might have heard of wolf's bane that burns and actually repels werewolves, but apparently there are some unnamed herbs that can make werewolves as well. Now here, there are cases of people exhibiting wolf-like behavior after consuming these herbs, but this theory has a little bit of a reality check. The truth of the matter is that these herbs were likely very strong hallucinogens, and the werewolves were just really, really high. Here we go.
Good old herbs.
Yes. Here we go. Another example. Drinking water that has been touched by a wolf. So, next time you go to the woods, take your water bottle with you. Next time you're visiting, particularly like Yellowstone or the Grand Tetons, where we have the wolves out there. So, whether you go ahead and bring in fresh water with you so that you do not touch the wolf-tainted water, or maybe you want to bring some wolf water home with you for later on, just in case you might be keen on actually doing the whole werewolf thing after the fact, we won't judge. There you go. Wolf-touched water. Finally, of course, the most classic cause of lycanthropy, and that is, of course, the full moon. Now, while it is only one of the many possible causes, it is the one that is most prominent in people's minds today. Many people still associate the moon with werewolves and madness. Some who work in police and emergency medical services have anecdotally claimed that the full moon nights are busier, crazier, and more dangerous than other nights.
Any teacher will agree with this. I am telling you from 17 years of experience.
Yeah. Now, mental health professionals will argue with you. They say that this perception may be rooted more in psychology and imagination than in reality, as studies have not found a good evidence link between the full moon and mayhem. I have to differ too, but hey.
75% body of water right here, moon, poles on that. Yeah, okay, enough said.
If you've ever gone out for a walk underneath the full moon, you might wonder about the merits of that. I think that it has something going for it. Now, we do, of course, have a number of true, actual werewolf tales from history to share with you tonight. So we're going to really get into
Glenn
the
had a
details.
question before we did that.
Oh, okay.
It's back before something to do with bark at the moon. Oh, you went too far.
Ooh, did I? Stupid question. Does it have to be a full moon? Not necessarily, no.
No.
That's, of course, the most classic excuse for logic, reasoning behind
yeah, that's where a lot of the
werewolf.
legend comes into. And remember, full moon is not just one night, it's 3 nights. You have the day before, the day of, the day after.
So it's typically, 3 days a month. And also then, but that's just for the full moon theory. That that does not touch on the other ones, such as the taking of the herbs and stuff like that, that supposedly contributing to werewolves as well. So the full moon is just one of the theories.
Yeah, and I cannot remember which month it is, but there is a month that actually has the wolf moon in it, which is also said to be another one that can transform. I didn't put that one in here. I'm just remembering it now.
You skipped something.
I forgot that. Sorry. All right, so let's talk about real werewolves. So, by the way, if you're ever going to France, have a silver bullet or two with you. I discovered France has a lot of werewolf history. So, starting with our origins, the historical origins of werewolves. Today they're considered these mythical beasts found in fiction, but that was not always the case. You don't need to go too far back in time to find an era where belief in werewolves was actually common. We have one that's only from a decade or two ago. What makes this actually believable is that there's very little difference between the activities of wolves and werewolves. So you have wolves in your area, particularly wolves that are attacking livestock. The evidence for a werewolf infestation is right in front of you. The only major difference is that the werewolf will eventually take its human form again, meaning that that off-kilter neighbor that everyone is a little wary of might be a werewolf. With that said, it's worth noting that because many thought lycanthropy as a curse, werewolves are often thought of as victims as much as villains. The transformation from man to wolf is said to be torturous. Recall your scenes from the American Werewolf in London and think about the many cures that people actually thought of that could really cure these imagined symptoms. Traditionally, there are 3 principal ways in which a werewolf can be cured. First one, werewolf may be cured medicinally and surgically. This could include extreme bloodletting, inducing vomiting, and drinking lots of vinegar. We do not recommend this in any way, shape, or form. Unsurprisingly, many of the werewolf patients died at the hands of those who promised to heal them. A werewolf, number 2, might have an exorcism done to purge them of their devilish curse. And number 3, the most drastic and most classic, a werewolf could be shot with a special bullet, namely a silver one. Now, just to complicate things, there are some very real medical conditions that can mimic the appearance of a werewolf and may have contributed to the early belief in the existence of these creatures. One is hypertrichosis, which creates unusually long hair on the face and body, and kind of is where the wolf man came from when you're looking at the original circus side acts. Then we have a second one called porphyria, which is characterized by extreme sensitivity to light. Thus, you are encouraging yourself only to go out at night. Seizures, anxiety, and other symptoms are also included in these. Now, neither of these rare conditions turns anyone into a werewolf, of course, but back in the old days where people believed in witches and vampires and magic, it was common to take these as werewolf stories. Now, clinical lycanthropy is recognized as a medical condition in which a person believes himself or herself to be an animal. Indeed, these are rare cases where people have claimed to be werewolves, and we actually have some historical ones for you.
Yes. Now we'll actually get to the real historical stories for you. And Patrick actually noted that this month, it's the wolf moon this month.
Okay.
So.
Thank you, Patrick. I knew it was one. There was one, I just couldn't remember when.
This month?
Yep.
So, our first actual story about a werewolf for this evening. So we have the Werewolves of Poligny. And this first case, as Beth mentioned earlier, lots of werewolves in France. And this comes from the Franche-Comté region of France, which is, it's on the border with Switzerland, basically. So eastern France. And it is a major hub of reported werewolf activity in the 16th century. It was here that Pierre Burgot, a.k.a. Gros Pierre, which is Fat Pierre, I guess he must have
big boy.
He must have been a big boy. An unremarkable man of modest means resided. One night in 1502, Burgot was struggling to herd his flock of sheep during a thunderstorm when 3 riders dressed in black approached. Burgot, desperate for help, told the riders that he was fearful that his sheep would be taken by predators. One of the riders said that if Burgot would acknowledge him as his lord and master, none of the sheep would be lost. Burgot anxiously agreed, renouncing God and kissing the rider's corpse-cold hand. Years later, Burgot was weary of his pact, but was summoned to a sabbat, which is kind of like a coven gathering, in the woods by a man by the name of Michel Verdun. Now, Verdun ordered Burgot to strip naked and be anointed with an unguent. Now, an unguent is kind of similar in nature to an ointment. And this is what turned him into a lightning-fast wolf. Verdun shared in this shape-shifting ability, and the 2 werewolves together waged a campaign of bloody violence against unwary travelers and children in the district. Between them, they first seized a boy of 7 years old, tearing him to pieces before an alarm was raised. They also ate a little girl whole, save only an arm, and killed agricultural workers indiscriminately. Burgot also confessed to tearing out a 9-year-old boy's throat with his teeth. Their chief motivation in procuring only free-range meat was the taste of warm blood, which they would lap up like a kitten with a saucer of milk. Shockingly, they also confessed to bestiality. Burgot and Verdun would seek out the she-wolves and stated that they preferred fornicating with the beasts rather than human women. Granted, if you're into that kind of stuff, the human women probably don't want too much to do with you in the first place. We'll leave it at that. Moving on. They were finally apprehended when Verdun was caught in the act of being a werewolf. A traveler passing through Poligny was attacked by a wolf, which retreated to a thicket after he bravely fought it off. The traveler followed the blood trail, hoping to prevent the angry wolf from surprising him again. Instead of a wolf, however, the man found Verdun, whose wife was bathing a wound in precisely the same place as the wolf had been injured. So Verdun, I guess, was married after all. Moving on. Verdun was arrested, tortured, and in short order implicated Burgot and a 3rd man named Philibert Montaut. The 3 stood trial for diabolicism, basically devil worship, murder, and the eating of human flesh. Their trial by the Inquisition drew throngs of people, and while Verdun and Burgot confessed, Montaut did not. Montaut's plea for innocence, however, fell on deaf ears, and he was put to the flame, along with Burgot and Verdun, for their crimes in 1521. Flamey endings is kind of common for werewolves, actually.
Yeah, it is.
Werewolves were treated very similar to witches.
And they're associated a lot in these old stories.
There's a lot of overlap, and getting a little ahead of ourselves. I think we talk about that in a little bit. But moving on, our next stop.
Hans the werewolf.
Hans.
So we're going to move over to Estonia, and this is the reported hunting grounds of Hans the werewolf in the mid-1600s. Estonia and much of the Baltic area were especially rich hunting grounds for witch finders, as they were peasantry and still practicing paganism or associated folk magic in the early modern period, and thus they accused one another quite often of casting spells. The God-fearing authorities interpreted such acts and accusation as satanic witchcraft, and many were put to death. The peasantry also believed wholeheartedly in werewolves, and the determent of many, including unfortunate Hans. Brought before the judges, Hans made his confession without the need for torture. He admitted to have hunted as a werewolf for 2 years, and he had not taken on the form willingly. Instead, he claimed to have been bitten by a man wearing black garments, who he later discovered to be a werewolf. The judge took the opportunity to ask the unusually pliable werewolf for further detail about his condition. Hans explained that when in wolf form, he felt more like a wild beast than a man, and that he believed the transformation to be physical, not just spiritual. If Hans thought his honesty and forthcomingness would earn him some leniency, he was sadly mistaken. Although there was no evidence for Hans committing any murders, he is still sentenced to death. The detail of the werewolf dressed in black that bit him was taken to be evidence of a pact with witchcraft, and this was punishable by death, with the mysterious figure being Satan himself. At his trial, Hans showed the court the scar from what appeared to be canine jaws, which he said was given to him by the werewolf. With hindsight, it's easy to see a teenager confessing to anything in order to escape torture and showing physical scars from a normal dog bite as proof. Well, unfortunately, that's hindsight. Hans was put to death for his confession of lycanthropy in 1651. Hans was far from alone. In the Middle Ages, werewolves were thought to be mostly created by witches, and the two became closely associated. Just as tens of thousands of accused witches were put to death, usually in the gruesome and sadistic ways, tens of thousands of accused werewolves were similarly dispatched. Much like the more familiar Salem witch trials, little evidence was needed beyond the testimony of one's neighbor to find yourself facing a panel of judges in almost certain death.
Yep. Yeah, we know the Salem witch trials very well here in the States today, but yeah, that type of activity was very rampant across Europe back in the day, and it wasn't just the witches, it was the werewolves.
Yeah.
So, back to France. We're going to be going to early spring 1603 in the Saint-Sever district of Gascony in southwest France. So we're going to the opposite side of the country this time, and this part of the country was absolutely gripped by terror. Little girls and boys had been disappearing without a trace from the fields and roads, and on one occasion a baby had been taken silently from its cradle whilst the mother was in another part of her small cottage. The local magistrate began an investigation, and several witnesses came forward. One, a 13-year-old girl, stated that she had been attacked by a savage wolf under a full moon, whilst another had been watching cattle when she was assailed by a gigantic wolf in broad daylight. Shockingly, a 14-year-old boy, Jean Grenier, had been heard to boast that he was behind the attacks. Tending cattle one day with Jean Gabor, his fellow servant, he told the 18-year-old that he would one day marry her. She then remarked at just how filthy Grenier was, and Grenier replied that this was because of the wolf skin that he wore to turn himself into a werewolf. He further elaborated that he was part of a pack of 9 werewolves that hunted 3 times a week in the area. He stated that his favorite prey was young children, owing to the tenderness of the flesh. Not exactly a good way to woo a woman, but hey, kid was 14, raging hormones, you'll say just about anything, I guess.
Trying to impress.
Yes.
Or scare.
Terrified, Jean immediately informed the local magistrate, who arrested Grenier. The teenager made a full confession without the need for torture. He had run away from an abusive father and was compelled to make a living by begging and cow herding. Another boy, Pierre de la Tillière, had taken him one night to meet the Lord of the Forest, who gave Grenier an icy kiss and a mark on his thigh. The Lord also gave the boy a wolfskin and unguent which transformed him into a wolf, and cautioned him never to cut his left thumbnail, which now resembled a claw. His first murder was that of a 3-year-old girl named Guillaume, who he ate whole. He confessed to various murders, and in each case was able to give exact details about the time and place at which each victim was taken. He also reported being chased away from a young boy by an elder brother who came forward to corroborate Grenier's statement. In spite of all this, the court actually winds up showing clemency to Grenier on account of his age and poor education, and he was sent to stay with Franciscans at the Friary of St. Michael the Archangel in Bordeaux in 1603. Now, come 1610, one Pierre de Lancer visited him and later reported what he found. Grenier had fierce, sunken black eyes, long teeth that looked like fangs, and his hands were like talons, with long and crooked nails. He would often rush around on all fours and seemed better able to move in this way than on two legs. He loved to hear talk of wolves, and the friars reported that in his early days at the friary, he would only eat raw meat and offal. Grenier died a short time later in 1611.
Apparently Una's trying to be a werewolf.
Come here, you
We're
little...
a kitty.
Come here.
She's trying to climb Chris's back and then his leg.
Gotcha. Ha-ha. I gotcha.
Alright, kitty time. That might not be a good idea.
She's fine for now.
Okay. Alright, so we're going to go to Thiess of Livonia. And this was an octogenarian man who was put on trial for heresy in 1692 in Jurgensburg, Swedish Livonia, modern-day Latvia. Thiess was originally presented to a court as a potential witness to a church robbery, but he shocked the judges by confessing to be a former werewolf who had retired from the activity 10 years previous to the date. His story fascinated all who were listening, and it was unique. So, this is where Thiess, actually says he's not the oldest werewolf. He's unusually claimed to be the only benevolent werewolf, however, who acted in the best interest of the Christian community. He explained that he even turned into a werewolf when many years before he was a beggar and a rascal and drank him a toast, conferring the power of the wolf upon him. He could do the same for others by toasting them. He and other Livonian werewolves underwent the transformation 3 nights a year, and it was on those nights that he would then go around killing farm animals and roasting them over an open fire seasoned with salt. Fortified with this meal, they would then travel across the sea, quotes, to hell, where they would chase the devil and his witches and beat them with iron rods. Now, during this visit, the werewolves would take back all the grain and the livestock that had been stolen by the witches throughout the year. If they failed to do this, that year's harvest would be poor. Werewolves, according to Thiess, were the servants of God and had an important role to play in his plans for mankind. Unfortunately, he also confessed that he practiced benevolent folk magic and that he didn't attend church, as he was too old to understand the Lutheran doctrine. Not knowing what else to do with him, the judges had Thiess flogged and permanently banished for misleading Christians. Because that's what you do when you have no idea what to do with somebody who just confessed to being a werewolf for God.
I think that is one of the most interesting ones that, in all the research that we came across, was the benevolent werewolf.
Yeah.
I haven't heard anything like that before, except in our kind of very modern, Hollywood-esque, sexy werewolf, vampire type stuff. Mm-hmm. Like Underworld.
Underworld, even like, as you mentioned before, Twilight, if you look at the newer version of, why am I blanking on it, the werewolf hunt, or the vampire hunter that's really the Archangel Gabriel. We had the movie Van Helsing. Took me a minute, because in that movie he gets turned into a werewolf. So, question?
Are there more modern day werewolves? And I was just saying, we
do have some.
We do have some. We're actually doing this kind of chronologically.
Yep.
We're going from the Middle Ages, and we're going to be coming forward. Our last few tales are going to be more modern ones.
Yes.
So, but with that said, our next stop is still in kind of in the Middle Ages, and it is still in France. Most people have kind of really associated werewolves and lycanthropy with Germany and the Black Forest and stuff like that. But
no, France.
France is a hotbed for werewolf activity, and this is our next tale with the horrific story of the werewolf tailor. His name is long lost. We don't know the guy's name, but he is known as the werewolf of Châlons or the demon tailor. Operating from the city of Châlons in the Champagne region, The surviving details of his crime are truly staggering, and simultaneously break several cultural taboos. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, the Parliament of Paris, which ultimately oversaw the trial and convicted the demon tailor, deemed the court transcripts so unpleasant that they ordered to have the transcripts burned. So all we know about this case is what has been passed down orally through the generations and what other people recorded about the tale. Now, by day, the werewolf ran a tailor shop on the outskirts of Châlons. And in classic fairy tale style, the tailor would often hear children playing outside his shop and proceeded to lure them inside with promises of treats or marvelous things. Once inside, the tailor would abuse them, slit their throats, and cut the bodies up with the skill of a butcher. Kids and werewolves doesn't usually end well.
No.
Now, he winds up storing these cut-up bits in barrels in the shop cellar, which no one had any reason to enter and inspect, and at first the unsuspecting townsfolk were simply disturbed at the sudden disappearance of the children, but then tales started to roll in from the countryside. The werewolf's crimes did not stop at the city limits, for he also roamed the nearby forests looking for lost travelers. In the forest, he turned himself into a wolf, stalking the unfortunate victims through the thick undergrowth and tearing their throats out. It seems that he would eat them in the forest rather than risk being seen carrying them back to Châlons. Despite his caution, tales of a half-man, half-beast started spreading across Châlons. As children continued to disappear and stories continued to roll in from the countryside, hysteria gripped the city. People would barricade themselves in their homes on moonlit nights, and hunting parties would scour the woods searching for the creature without avail. People feared that they would forever be at the mercy of the creature terrorizing their community. With time, there began to be suspicions cast upon the modest tailor shop on the outskirts of town. People talked of cries heard near the premises, and they whispered about the eccentric tailor himself and his intense interest in the children around his store. When reports began to emerge of the tailor speeding off into the woods at all hours of the night, a posse gathered to search his shop, and what they found within those walls was the stuff of nightmares. The cellar was packed with barrels found to contain bleached bones and butchered human flesh. The tailor's punishment was execution by flame. It is said that he burned to death, blaspheming and unrepentant to his last breath.
Alright, so now we've basically been looking at cases from the early modern period where werewolves were active in Europe. But now we're going to start actually moving towards more recent times. We're going to start with Manuel Blanco Romasanta, and he is Spain's first documented serial killer known as the Werewolf of Alariz, who was given the defense of lycanthropy in his trial. Romasanta was a fairly unremarkable young man, and what people recalled about him most was his notably short stature. He stood at less than 5 feet tall, and as an adult he first worked as a tailor. He did get married, but the wife died at a young age in 1833, and whether it was the loss of his wife or some dissatisfaction with being a tailor, he grew restless and decided to become a traveling salesman. His work took him across Galicia through Portugal, and he would often drum up trade by acting as a guide for the travelers crossing the mountains. His first murder seems to have taken place in 1844, when he killed a constable attempting to collect a debt that he owed to a supplier. He fled and was convicted in absentia and sentenced to a 10-year imprisonment. Now, Romasanta obtained a false passport and lived in a small village in Galicia, where he took up work as a cook and a weaver. While he became very friendly with the women of the village, the local men viewed him with disdain due to his reportedly effeminate nature. While living in this region, he also continued to work as a guide for those wishing to cross the mountains. It is at this time that his serial killing, or lycanthropic career began. He would kill women and children who hired him and took them deep in the mountains. He forged letters to their families, and he kept doing this as long as he possibly could so their deaths would go unnoticed. Suspicions grew when he began to sell the victims clothing and soap rumored to be made of human fat. Finally, those suspicions brought a formal allegation in 1852, and he was arrested in Nobela in Toledo region of Spain. At his trial, he admitted to 13 murders, but gave the defense of lycanthropy. He said he first turned into a wolf himself after coming across a pair of creatures in the mountains. Examined by the doctors according to the principles of phrenology, which was a discredited identification of character traits through measuring your skull.
Yeah.
No. He was declared a liar and was convicted of 9 murders, sentenced to death, but died in prison. The details are a bit murky, but it is said he was either shot by a guard or he succumbed to cancer. It's been theorized that the famine in Galicia actually, at the time, rendered him insane through a lack of malnourishment. Or through a malnourishment, not a lack of malnourishment. Wow. Okay. Crazy.
Yes, which, as we were commenting on in the comment section, yeah, a lot of the tales of lycanthropy and werewolves and that actually do wind up, they often do wind up coming back to being rooted in people, believe that it's, was a mental illness issue. So we, of course, have a much better grasp on that type of thing today than they did back in the Middle Ages, but looking back through historical records, they think that many of these tales of werewolves and that can be attributed to some sort of mental health issue, which really, in that case, makes some of the more modern tales that we have to share with you all that more interesting, because we kind of have these explanations, and, well, some of them kind of get ruled out here and there. But we are getting there. That one, we were working our way up into the 1800s.
Yep, so our next one also mid-1800s.
Yes.
And then we will get to the modern ones. I promise they're coming. You guys are getting ahead of us.
So, we got the Galician werewolf. And this is kind of comparatively modern case. This one goes to 1849 and was discussed at length by the clergyman and antiquarian Sabin Baring-Gould. Now, he is best remembered, actually, for writing a hymn called Onward Christian Soldiers.
Which you may be familiar with.
Yeah. Now, with that said, this incident that he wrote about took place in the hamlet of Poligny in modern-day Poland. So, we're still in Europe, but new country. Now, this settlement was romantically surrounded by thick pine forests where most of its inhabitants worked at the time of the story. The villagers in 1849 were extremely poor, but apparently generous, for a beggar made his living there outside the church for several years. Venerable and with a long white beard, he could be sure of alms from Polonia's inhabitants. The beggar, named Swiatek,
These names are not cool.
No, was one day being fed by a family in one of the hovels. He seemed fond of a young girl whom he ascertained was an orphan, and gave her a ring, instructing her to go to a pine in the churchyard and recite an incantation, after which she would find more jewels. She called her siblings to join her on the treasure hunt, but Swiatek told her she must go alone. He departed soon after from his meal, and the orphan girl was never seen again. Shocker. Soon other children playing amongst the pines disappeared as well. The disappearances were blamed on wolves, and the villagers began to kill any they encountered. At the same time, the local innkeeper lost a couple of ducks and immediately suspected the resident beggar of theft, for Swiatek maintained a wife and children simply by charity. As the innkeeper approached Swiatek's home, he could smell roasted meat, and his suspicions were confirmed. Entering the hovel, the innkeeper noticed Swiatek conceal something beneath his clothes and immediately seized him around the throat. However, what fell from Swiatek's clothes was not a duck, but the head of a 14-year-old girl. When his home was searched, it was found to contain the skillfully butchered remains of the girl. Her organs had been removed and cleaned. A bowl of fresh blood was under the oven, and her limbs were roasting over a fire. Swiatek confessed to having killed and eaten 6 people, though the number was suspected to be far higher. His taste for human flesh came after a catastrophic fire killed several people at a tavern. he had partaken in some of the roasted meat. The locals suspected him of lycanthropy, but Swiatek hung himself in prison before the charge could be brought.
Yep.
You wonder where the big bad wolf comes from? Wolves, kids, bad juju.
Yep. Alright, so moving on to the Wolf of Ansbach. And this is a tale of a man who claimed to be able to turn himself into wolves. And in hindsight, it actually possibly could have been a real wolf in this case. The Wolf of Ansbach operated in the area around modern Bavaria city of the same name in 1685, before being executed in a manner of befitting the convicted human criminal. Operating alone, which is rare for a wolf, this lupine menace began taking an unusual amount of livestock being grazed in the countryside. Soon it began to take its attention and turn to those tending the animals, mostly women and children. The number of peasants the wolf killed is unknown, but its depredations were such that during the period of time when people lived cheek by jowl with wolves and occasionally lost their lives to the creatures, the fear spread through the region. Now, just recently, the cruel and merciless Burgermeister, or the chief magistrate, of Ansbach had died, and his death was unlamented. It was soon rumored that the evil magistrate had returned from the grave as a werewolf, and was seeking revenge on those who cared little for his death. Soon there was a concentrated effort to slay the creature and banish the late lycanthropic Burgermeister.
Lycanthropic?
Yeah, that.
Lycanthropic. The more I drink, the easier the words roll off the tongue.
And that's my problem tonight. The great mob found the troublesome werewolf, and I use that in quotes, and tirelessly pursued it with hounds across the country. Wolves having impressive stamina, but eventually they need to rest too. So it leapt down a nearby well, and the dogs stood baying above the well, leading their masters to the trap beast, which of course had no means of escaping. It was slain with a variety of weapons, including cudgels, pitchfork, and every angry peasant mob needs the latter. Surprisingly, though, the wolf did not resume its human form upon being beaten, which, to the contrary, is what wolf lore says will happen. Hi, sweetie. Either from embarrassment or unwavering faith in the true nature of the animal, the wolf was then treated as if it were human. It was triumphantly paraded as a corpse through... No, you don't get to edit.
It was triumphantly paraded through the corpse through Ansbach. The mob first cut off the beast's muzzle and dressed it in human clothing. A wig was placed on its head and a beard upon its chin, and so it came to resemble the deceased Burgermeister. Finally, the fortunately dead wolf was hung from a gibbet for all to see, a common practice for human criminals whose bodies served as a warning to would-be wrongdoers, or, in this case, werewolves.
You're going to dress up a dead wolf. Got it.
Yep. Yep, Una is intent on stealing the show tonight.
Yes, she is.
We have a rambunctious kitten. Now, for a truly modern tale.
Yes.
We are going to to Essex. We're going to England.
Yes.
Born and bred in Essex was a man by the name of William Ramsey. He was only 9 years old when the first inkling of trouble arose. Like any normal child, he was outside playing in the back garden of his home, but then he began to feel strange. It was deep into one Saturday afternoon in 1952 when an icy blast of frigid cold swept all over him. Perspiration froze on his skin and a foul stench came close to making him vomit. The bewildered youngster had only two things on his mind: running away to a life on the ocean wave and wolves. By this time he was close to the garden fence, and only the calls of his mother brought him out of whatever had gripped him. However, something else took complete control of him instead. Intense and pure rage had installed itself firmly within his psyche. Using this and the adrenaline-fueled strength he now possessed, he uprooted a fence post and with the fence still attached was swinging it like a club. Not even his parents could easily remove the post with their bare hands. What the young child did next made both of his parents flee back into the relative safety of their home, leaving Bill isolated outside. Bill Ramsey placed the wire meshing into his mouth and began gnawing at it. The cold sensations returned and a low growl emanated from deep within him. Both his parents remained inside the house until it was apparent that their son had calmed down considerably. For nearly 15 years after that terrifying incident, nothing even remotely similar happened in the life of Bill Ramsey. He had grown up, got married, and become a doting father of 3. The first 2 years of his marriage, though, were plagued by nightmares. Each dream was the same, and the results ended up identical as well. Ramsey always awoke in a cold sweat and was overwhelmed by feelings of dread and unease. In his dreams, he was always a few steps behind his wife, who would then turn to face him and run away in extreme terror. It was only in 1967 that these dreams ended. 18 months on, and Bill woke one night to hear what he thought was the panting of a wild animal somewhere inside the bedroom. He was correct. It was Bill himself. Once again, there was a lull in the activity for approximately 15 years, and by now it's now 1983, and Bill was out with some friends at a local pub. After several drinks, Bill began to feel the same icy chills that first manifested much earlier in his life. He made an excuse and headed to the lavatory. Once there, he checked himself in the mirror and saw a wolf looking back at him. This was just a precursor as to what was to happen on their way home. In the car ride home, and without any warning, Bill began to growl and immediately turned to his fellow passenger. Both hands twisted into claws, and Ramsey tried to bite the leg of his friend. The designated driver didn't panic. He brought the car to a stop and made attempts to get the raging Bill out of the back of the car. It still took several minutes and quite a bit of effort to finally get Bill out of the car, and by now the frenzy had dissipated. Worse was yet to come, though, but not for another 18 months. Shortly before Christmas 1983, Bill begins to suffer from chest pains, and thoughts immediately turned to a possible heart attack. Bill checked himself into the emergency room at the local hospital and was halfway through a blood pressure examination when he sank his teeth into the arm of the nurse and ran through the ward as a man possessed. Witnesses would later reveal that Bill had hunched shoulders and both hands had curled into talons or claws and bared lips just like a rabid animal. Anyone that dared approach was knocked down easily with almost superhuman strength. It took quite a few people working as a team to finally subdue the rampaging man. A police officer managed to place handcuffs around Ramsey's wrist, but still, this was not sufficient. A tranquilizer finally put an end to the outburst. The following morning, this tranquilizer had worn off, and so did the original transformation. After a hearty breakfast, the attending doctor listened to the whole story and recommended that Bill remains under observation. However, he was a voluntary patient and was fully entitled to check himself out. Bill did so, but was back within the span of 2 months. In January 1984, Bill had just finished a visit with his mother when he began to feel an attack coming on. He made it to the same hospital on the same terms of his previous visit. The attending nurse was alone with Ramsey in the emergency room and feared for her life once she told Ramsey that she was going to find a doctor. Ramsey threw the nurse to one side and subsequently lunged for an orderly who came to check on the commotion. By chance, 4 police officers were at the hospital and immediately circled Ramsey. The officers and Ramsey had a standoff for a few seconds until Ramsey began snarling and growling at all 4. The policemen advanced on Ramsey, who defended himself with some vigor. One of the 4 police officers suffered wounds so severe that he ended up in the hospital for 4 days before they managed to get him into handcuffs. The short walk to the waiting squad car went off without incident, as Ramsey had apparently regained his faculties. When he arrived at the local police station, they immediately summoned the police surgeon. Ramsey considered the suggestion of checking himself into a mental institution, but decided against it, citing the stigma he might feel in the days to follow. Since he was clearly in control and rational, Ramsey was released. In the summer of 1987, he was back at the police station. This time, however, he was much more public-spirited, having made a citizen's arrest of a local teenage prostitute. He drove her to the station, and the second that he parked his car, she fled into the station. Ramsey once again felt the now familiar sensation surging from the middle of his chest, just as a burly policeman approached the car. The officer, considerably bigger than Ramsey, started to question him and made the big mistake of gently touching Ramsey's arm. The wolf within him took immediate hold of Ramsey, and the officer was thrown to the ground and was having the life choked out of him until help finally came. Ramsey was so wild that it took a dozen policemen to hold him down and 2 injections to finally restrain him. For the next 10 days, countless MRIs, X-rays, and psychiatric tests could not determine what was wrong with Ramsey. Clearly, there was some issue that needed resolving. Nobody should really switch from mild-mannered rationale to rampaging berserker and back again in the space of a few minutes, unless there was something seriously wrong. One thing that went in Bill's favor was the visit to London of American demonologist Ed and Lorraine Warren, who we have talked about in numerous cases on this show already. Or not on this particular episode, but in our shows. Now, Bill's story appeared on a television show at the time of their stay, and Lorraine immediately considered that Bill was being possessed and got in touch with the Southend-on-Sea police station. After dialogue on both sides, the Warrens obtained the opportunity to talk to the Ramseys. The Warrens negotiated with Bill Ramsey and finally convinced him to come to their church in Connecticut and undergo an exorcism with their own specialist, Bishop Robert McKenna. Bill relented and made the trip with his wife in 1989. A tabloid newspaper, The People, sponsored the trip. The night before the exorcism was due to take place, Ramsey tried to strangle his wife while she slept. When the exorcism actually began, Bill was not at all impressed. The service was being conducted in Latin, and for half an hour, nothing happened. Bill then took on an entirely different appearance. His face contorted and both hands formed claws. McKenna commanded the demon to leave. The full force of werewolf fury descended on McKenna one time and then disappeared for good. The whole event was recorded on film.
And it's actually, there are some clips of it out there on the internet that you can view.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the entire thing, but you can see some of the clips.
Yeah. So Bill Ramsey's last appearance in public, that at least that we know of, was in 1992 when he updated on his progress. Just before his exorcism, the transformations were increasing in both frequency and seriousness, and since that time there have been no incidents recorded. No one has been rampaging uncontrollably through the streets of Southend-on-Sea for many years now.
At the phone.
Yes.
All right, so this is one you guys have mentioned in the comments. Yes, The Legend of the Beast of Bray Road, and that is the last one, correct?
I think it is.
Yep. Mark Shackleman arrived in St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children a little before midnight. He carried his flashlight on his belt, and as the night watchman for the school, he walked these grounds every single night. The school was located inside the former Franciscan convent outside of Jefferson, Wisconsin, and the grounds covered several old buildings, an orchard, and a wide open field where several Native American burial mounds had been preserved. The year was 1936. Shackleman was in his 30s, a husband and a father, working for the uneventful job for a paycheck to support his family. In the rural Jefferson, there wasn't much to worry about save the possibility of a burglar or some teenagers playing a prank. That night, Shackleman was crossing the fields when he saw a shadow. He squinted at what it was. It was hunched formed on all four legs, digging into one of the mounds. From the canine way that it dug, it could have been a dog, maybe a wolf, but even from far away, Shackleman could see that this thing was far too big to be either of those. Suddenly, it looked up at him, and then it stood up. The sleek, hairy body unfurled to over 6 feet tall. It had shaggy canine face, and beneath a thick fur, he could see the muscular body of a man. A low growl echoed across the field. Shackleman smelled rotting meat. His heart beating fast, trying to control his breath, he stepped back. With a sudden violence, the thing turned and ran off into the trees and was gone. The next night, Shackleman returned to his job for his usual rounds And as he walked the fields, he saw the shadow again, digging in the same mound from the night before. This time he gripped his flashlight tight, ready to run or to swing if need be. Again, it stood up, but this time it opened its mouth. Shakaman saw fangs hanging down from its teeth, and its lips pulled back in a snarl. It growled at him, a speech half human, half beast. He didn't move, and again the creature turned and left. He never saw it again, but the horrendous growl and the way it seemed to speak to him in his mind stuck for many years afterward. This legend was the first reported sighting of the creature that eventually became known as the Beast of Bray Road, and sightings became prevalent in the 1980s and 90s, particularly centralized around Elkhorn, Wisconsin. One woman reported seeing the beast attempting to break into her home and later injuring one of her horses, leaving a gash across its back. She claimed the footprints it left behind were over 12 inches long. Another woman spotted it crossing the road in front of her car. Another driver saw it crouched on the side of the road eating an animal. And one young girl reported the beast chasing her through the forest. In 1999, an 18-year-old girl was driving down Bray Road near Delvin when she says her right tire hit something, lifting it up and off the ground. She stopped and got out to see what she had run over, but there was nothing there. She looked to the side of the road and saw a massive wolfish form standing on two legs. She rushed back to the car, and as she peeled away, the beast leapt onto her trunk, but slid off in the slick rain as she sped home. When she came forward with her story, many other sightings were reported as well, prompting both a further investigation and fresh skepticism and mockery. These sightings prompted The Week, a Walworth Country weekly paper, to send Linda Godfrey to investigate and compile the stories. While initially she was skeptical, she says she came to believe the sincerity of the witnesses who spoke to her. On her website, Godfrey writes, "There's a high probability that everyone is not always seeing the same thing. There could be a biological, physical animal seen by some, while others see phantoms or supernatural entities of a variety of sources. Few may be misidentifications or hoaxes." In 2003, Godfrey wrote The Beast of Bray Road, Tailing Wisconsin's Werewolf, which recounts in depth what she had learned in speaking to the many witnesses around Elkhorn and who reported their interactions with the beast. The sightings of the beast have slowed down considerably since the 90s, although still one or another crops up on occasion. The veracity of any of these claims remains a cause for speculation. There is undoubtedly horrors in this world that we cannot explain, and this may be one of them. Now, we will say that, yes, there is a legend, a local legend here in Virginia known as the Werewolf of Henrico, but it's
werewolf.
A very, very weak story, so we decided not to include it.
There's not much to say about it other than people say they saw a large wolf-like creature on a golf course. Which, there aren't any wolves in Virginia or Henrico, so...
Yeah.
But yeah, no stories of people having their throats torn out or anything like that. Just a large wolf-like creature that could possibly have been like a werewolf.
Yeah.
So we do have that locally, but that's the extent of our story. That's why.
That's why we didn't dedicate any major time to this.
It didn't wind up in the script because that's about as much as we would have had to say about it.
Hi, sweetie.
So. We'll wrap up with this little tidbit here, this fun little tidbit.
Don't show your butts.
Well, werewolves are the best-known shapeshifters. They are not the only were-animals said to exist around the world. Others include were-foxes, were-dogs, were-tigers, were-snakes, were-hares, were-bears, and even were-crocodiles. Of course, wolves are more threatening than dogs and foxes, and there's a reason why most werewolf films are scary and, well, Wallace and Gromit and The Curse of the Were-Rabbit was a comedy.
And our favorite.
It's a fun one if you haven't seen it. Anyways, but like vampires, werewolves have been around for millennia, and nothing short of a silver bullet is likely to stop it from being around for a millennia more. Now, the silver bullet, our good friend Donnie did point out that, silver bullets... very soft metal, very malleable, not very practical.
Not gonna kill something, sorry. But
Kitsune 2, basically were foxes. Yep.
yeah.
Yep. So, yeah, werewolves are fun, and well, they certainly, of course, get a bad rap as far as being bloodthirsty creatures. If you look at the history behind where they come about from, most of these tales, they're people that they did not become werewolves of their own free will, and they don't exactly have control over their faculties when they wind up becoming werewolves.
Yep.
Even the classic movie the Wolfman, he became a werewolf, not of his own free will, that's for sure. So.
Yep. Alright, so 2 weeks from today we're going to talk about Maryland State Parks, haunted ones, starting with Point Lookout.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Because then 2 weeks we our good friend Glenn, his birthday is this month, and since he watches all of our shows, he had a special request that we do an episode about Point Lookout, and we are going to be talking extensively about Point Lookout.
I think I found all the stories, Glenn.
Yep. So, with that said, that was probably about good for about half an episode. We're looking for some other material in the area, and we got it. We just kind of need to get it in order.
I need to flesh it out.
But to go ahead and to flesh out the rest of the episode, but our next session in 2 weeks will be about Point Lookout ghosts and other hauntings from the local environs up there.
Yep. But again, if you're in the area, we're still doing tours only once a week, but we're doing them, or we're doing private ones if you would prefer that. Still not able to do any of our indoor events. Hopefully soon.
Yeah, hopefully soon, but we shall see.
Yep, not quite yet.
Not quite yet.
Any last questions?
Let's see. Kiana said she used to watch the Wallace and Gromit show all the time. Yes, fantastic show. And yes, poor werewolves. Definitely agree with that, Trina. Feeling sorry for the werewolves. Some of them do it of their own free will, others not so much.
Yeah, most of them were victims.
Yep. Let's see, Patrick quoted, "Even a man who is pure of heart and says his prayers by night may become a werewolf when the wolf's bane blooms and moon is full and bright."
Yep.
Do you know where that's from?
I have heard it before, but I cannot remember.
Yep. Maybe Patrick will let us know. The original Wolfman movie. So when we must have seen it.
Oh, it was
Yeah.
It was written in one of the books that's in the scene.
Okay.
He reads it.
Okay.
I remember it now. Okay.
Yep, and Trina says that she got her, she's a nurse, she got her vaccine today, so yay, things will get better. We are certainly
yes. We're waiting for our turn.
We're way down the line. We'll be waiting for a little while, but good for our first responders, our medical medical first line people to be getting that. So yeah, with that, we will go ahead. We will wrap things up for tonight. We'll see you in a couple of weeks here again. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, as always, feel free to drop us a line anytime.
Yep.
We are, you can go ahead. You can drop us a Facebook message, shoot us an email, all that good stuff. We're happy to chat with you, and we really appreciate you guys tuning in here weekend, for us, and Patrick's happy. We made Patrick happy. So
welcome,
we're glad that we could do that. It was really a very good suggestion. We had a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun researching this one.
Yep. So, but beyond next week, or wait, do we already have lined up stuff lined up for?
We're going to do a presidential one.
Yes, because President's Day.
Yeah, right on President's Day that week. And then I think I was going to try to see what I could find for ghostly love stories.
Yep. So
that one's going to take a little more digging.
We got a lot of stuff coming up, though.
Yeah.
We need to howl on camera.
Oh!
I think that's it for the questions. If we did miss anything, we will go through. We'll review the comments after we're off the air here. And if we missed anything, we'll go ahead. We'll respond to you. But again, thank you all very much. And I think with that, we will go ahead and call it. Oh wait, new comment. Oh, yeah, just another thank you. Yay.
All right, so yeah, we will see you guys in 2 weeks.
Yep.
And be safe. I hear there might be snow coming, so be safe.
Yes, yep. Stay warm, stay safe, and take care. We'll talk to y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.